Michael Page. I'm from Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. And this particular project involves our city, and it's kind of got its start between us discovering two atlases in our collection, in our special use collections, in what was then called Marble. There were two maps. One was 1928 Atlanta, and the other one was 1878 Atlanta, and they were in map pages. I had somebody come to me and ask about, hey, we want to trace this person's route through the city. And I got this idea that, hey, why don't we create a historical GIS by merging all these pages together, making a GIS out of them, and then we could do a lot more analysis outside of the paper map. That idea kind of grew later on to, hey, why don't we put this on the web, and so that other people can make use of it. And that's kind of been the philosophy to begin with. So what I'm going to talk about is kind of the development of this project from the data production, because there was a lot to it. We involved a lot of students, et cetera. Then some of the features and methods that we use to display the maps, and we keep finding that we wanted to keep adding things to it, as you'll see. And then the other thing is that this wasn't meant to be like, it was meant to be open-ended too, in the sense that we didn't really see an end to this project. We saw as kind of bookending it between 2 years, 2 key years that span a 70-year history of Atlanta's young history. And then we wanted to leave it open so that we could explore, because we knew technology was going to change and we knew methods were going to change. So you'll see a lot of things that can sometimes be incomplete because there's big hurdles to it. We saw value in building it anyway. I'm going to first start kind of with Atlanta's history. These are 3 graphics at Atlanta at different time periods, and this will explain why we kind of bookend Atlanta's history from 1870 to 1940. We stopped there. The very bottom image is Atlanta right after the American Civil War, where it was utterly destroyed. So we kind of get a clean slate to build the map from, so to speak. And then the upper left corner is the late 1800s, and you'll see it's kind of a low profile, and then we get into the early part of the 20th century, we see a boom in building. Atlanta was at the convergence of 2 main railroads, and it was on Muskogee Creek land that they decided to put these 2 railroads together. They came together, and that's kind of how this whole city started to spring up. And because of its position, it grew economically and demographically in a relatively short period of time. So it actually saw, after its destruction, a boom in development between this period. You can see the kind of, just by the skyline in the late 1800s, it was very much maybe buildings that are 2, maybe 3 stories high with church spires, very low lying. And then by the 1920s, we start seeing a lot of skyscrapers. So it's a very interesting time period. And then also in the 20s is the boom of the electric streetcar, which is also a land shaper. It really created some of the first sprawl of the city. But we really wanted to focus on both the central business district and the urban core for our studies. But some of these maps do sprawl beyond that. And then again, that says why we kind of ended it at 1940, because you see, well, the 30s, you have the Great Depression, so there was not much economic activity. But then by the time we get to the 40s, the automobile springs upon the landscape, and it really transformed Atlanta in some other ways. So if we're going to focus on the core, it really gave us focus to do 1870 to 1940. And also had to do with kind of the available information in the maps that we had. The first map we had was Williams and Hines' map of 1928. And so the U.S. Coast Survey came through Georgia, particularly most of the city areas in the Georgia coast, and they put out a whole bunch of benchmarks and ground control points. And that gave the foundation to actually map with some accuracy for the first time in a place like Atlanta, Georgia, and other places in the world too. We found an example with one of our partner institutions University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. And they had a very similar map and map company that came in and did this high resolution mapping. So there's benchmarks in this map, and like I said, the positional accuracy is really good. So what we wanted to do was, after looking at this, we wanted to kind of merge the maps together, but then also draw upon its legend, and then build a geospatial database from it so that we could start asking questions, and also so that we could bring information that was not in the atlas or contained in the atlas, like extraneous information from archives, and bring other information in, like land values and other data layers that we could create. So the big part and the big question was, how do we do data extraction? And so we set about with students mostly, used it as a teaching tool. We also had some students in our digital lab that worked on it kind of as a internship. So some of the layers were pretty easy, like the administrative boundaries, even the rail networks and the waterways. And then the harder things were the building footprints. We tried to do a raster to vector conversion, and instead it fell apart because the details in the map. And then we digitized places of interest, so that's the one in the center. And then I wanted to attach that to information. So what we were essentially building was a historical geocoder. So we're really aiming to build historical geocoders from 1870 to 1930, 1940. We first looked at the idea of building relative geocoders, that is, using it like extrapolating across a street network. But we decided upon the absolute geocoding method, and so we divided the city into 4 quadrants based off this University of Chicago map, and we targeted 1928 as the year that we were going to build these geocoders. So we matched geographic coordinates to structures, but then also gave them building IDs, so we'd have unique identifiers. You'd think that all the Atlanta city directories would be easy to find. We still have some that are missing, that we've gone to every library, finding resources from different places. But we did have 1928, and we started building a geocoder from that. One of the interesting things is when we were looking at some of the history of street numbering in Atlanta, and Sao Paulo has an even worse problem, is that the whole street numbering changed in 1926, which makes it problematic. And then prior to 1926, it was very piecemeal of how they did addressing in Atlanta. But once we got to 1928, it was pretty straightforward. However, it's in typed text. So we had to get data from the page into OCR, into text, and into some sort of structure that existed so that we could build this historical geocoder. So we clipped out the ads, and then we also started reviewing the OCR text, and we noticed a lot of problems. And it also included race in here. We noticed that as well. The big problem was typewriters make smudges. They have inconsistencies. Humans make errors, so we had to correct this. So we used machine learning to kind of teach the geocoder to be constructed using Python. And we had some of our students in the center go through the corrections and flag, yes, this is how this S smudges, and then we're able to fix that. Again, the problem is the 1928 is formatted totally different than 1927, and it's totally different than 1929. There were some years they didn't build it. But our thought on making a geocoder is if we could get this 1 year, maybe do that, and maybe do 1870, we can be constructionist or